Welcome to another episode of the Balanced Growth Show. I am Dr. Travis Perry. Today, we are privileged to have Scott Maderer. In 2017, Scott and his wife, Carrie, started Inspired Stewardship as a business to serve Christian men and couples that are struggling to live out their calling. They work to help align the way you use your time, your talent, and your treasure so that you can identify and live a fully authentic life that allows you to authentically live your calling, serve others, and provide for your family. As a certified human behavior consultants and members of the John Maxwell team, they focus on helping you understand yourself, understand others, and through that understanding, build the kingdom. After almost 30 years in education, Scott and Carrie founded Inspired Stewardship to live out their own calling to coaching in 2011. This is now a full-time business, offering assistance through one-on-one coaching, speaking, and workshops. His book, Inspired Living: Assemble the Puzzle of Your Calling by Mastering Your Time, Your Talent, and Your Treasures, was published by Morgan James back in July of 2024. Scott, welcome to the show, my friend.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
And as always, I love to hear from you, your story. Fill in the blanks on how you got to this point. How did you come to discover your inspired stewardship and your calling, and fill us in on how that led to you guys, both you and your sweet wife, deciding to help others.
So absolutely. So I actually started, I had the idea of I was going to become a medical researcher. So I was going to become a doctor and do medical research on the side, not as a practicing physician, but doing medical research. So I actually went to college, got a degree in biochemistry, a second degree in genetics, started doing some research work while I was thinking about graduate school and all of that. And kind of figured out that research work turns out is a lot of time spent chasing grant money and very little time actually doing research. And I didn't really want to chase grant money the rest of my life. So I pivoted and kind of entered the family business and became a school teacher. My dad had been a teacher and then had run his own business for years. My mom was still a teacher. So it's kind of an obvious thing to be a school teacher. So I became a science teacher in the state of Texas. I did that for 16 years. I loved it. There was a lot of things about teaching that fed my soul and my spirit. It's also exhausting and you don't get paid very much. So it's kind of one of those things where, as much as I felt called to do it and loved to do it, I knew there had to be other ways and more to it than that. My wife and I, during that period, as I was kind of getting to the end of my teaching career, we we're beginning to have some financial struggles of our own. I was actually suicidal because of finances. That's actually the number one cause of male suicide is financial issues, financial problems. We were not talking to each other. We were probably headed for a divorce. And we kind of had an epiphany moment and turned our life around and started living very differently and began to get our own way out of debt and change the way we were living with money and with time and with other things. I returned to church at that period. A lot of different things kind of aligned and changed in our life. At the same time, I'm changing careers. So I'm leaving teaching and I went into the corporate world, did that for 11 years. I kind of moved up into a senior position pretty quickly. Had a team of leaders that reported to me, and then a team of people that reported to them, and then reported to me. So I had about 180 people on my team. Big budget, lots of client work, on a plane all the time, flying all around the country. And again, there were things about this job that I really felt were authentic and real, where I was developing the other leaders, when I was working with the clients, when I was solving the puzzles of things. And paralleling that, because my wife and I were doing things differently, we started having people come to us going, dude, there's something different about y'all. Can you teach me? Can you help me? Here's what's going on in my life. Can you help me with whatever? And it started with finances, and eventually we added time and we added talent so that we would begin. And that's why we call ourselves a stewardship coach. So that's the Inspired Stewardship. It was those three components of the resources kind of all morphed and added in. So we started the business on the side while I was still in corporate. And as it grew and as I felt more aligned with it and more like, yeah, this is touching more of those buttons of what I was put on the planet to do, I pivoted and we started the business as a full-time business, as you mentioned, in 2017. And then recently, that was where the book came from, was kind of taking some of those ideas and frameworks and the experience I've had at working, thousands of clients all over the world and trying to kind of encapsulate that down into a book.
Wow. Just wow. Yeah. Great experience. I know I've had the privilege of being interviewed by you on your podcast. And it's interesting how much that we have in common, quite honestly, Scott. I chased grants as a as a researcher for a while. And yeah, the research world's a whole different ball
It's a
game.
different planet.
People don't really understand
It's very
until they're there.
political, very
Super
money,
political.
very, yeah, it's a
Super
weird,
political.
weird
Yeah.
business.
In fact, I was going down a different rabbit hole with marriage, and I had a wise sage tell me, listen, I know where you want to go with this, but that's not going to produce any jobs because it's going to politically isolate you. And I get it. I know what you want to do, but you should really chase the research in family finance. And I started down that hole, and still there was money to be chased, and um, like you mentioned, if it's not in your wheelhouse, it's not something you enjoy doing, you're going to put it off, and it's going to
Hmm.
become such a chore, which is interesting. What I teach in my concept, and sound like you do as well. So I love this idea, time and talents, and obviously, your financial aspects too. This is a lot where you and I align. Talk to us a little bit about first off, kind of this important tangent that I think is really important. We're going to talk about this first, and we'll get to your book.
Hmm.
Let's talk about this place where men find themselves in. We don't like to talk about it because we're guys. We don't like to talk about it because we're not supposed to be this weak, individual. Yet when we submit ourselves to Christ, and we really, as you mentioned, you kind of had this turnaround. You went back to church. I mean, it is weakness.
Hmm.
It's weakness.
It's pride is what it
It
is. It's the
is.
sin of pride.
It is, and realizing, well, what we can do this all on our own. So let's talk about this issue, because I have touched on this so much, and I have felt really called to help men
Hmm.
because I was there
Hmm.
and I felt it, and I've had ideation. No actions, but I know that other men have, and men are 5 times more likely, especially business owners, five
Hmm.
times more likely to be suicidal, and that's also related to workaholism and all these other things that you and I
Hmm.
tackle. So why don't you give us a little bit of what you discovered here as this tangent of male suicide?
Yeah, and I honestly, thank you for that, and I'll be happy to share. And I don't think it's a tangent either. I think it is part and parcel of what goes on in our mindset and our beliefs when it comes to money and a time too, for that matter. And again, you work with them as well, and you kind of see how they're intertwined, because I really do think at the end of the day, it isn't time or money or these things. It's us, it's our own view of these things. It's our relationship with these things. That's why I jokingly say people come for help with time, they come for help with money, and all I ever work on is talent, because at the end of the day, that's really where all of the change happens. And that's what I experienced myself. I had put so much of my identity into being a good provider, being a good man, being a good, father to my son, being a good husband to my wife. I had put my identity in these roles, and then I measured the success of these roles by simply how much income I could produce. How much revenue I could produce, what was in the bank account, what stuff could I give to my wife or to my son, what did they have, a new phone or a new this or a new that. And the weird thing was, it was a way of putting me primacy, and I was the source of security and provision and all of those things, as opposed to submitting or stepping back and going, there's things I have control over, and there's things that I should be doing. But at the end of the day, that only goes so far. I'm not ultimately in control. I'm not ultimately the source of security. I'm not ultimately the one that is providing all of this. That belongs to God. And I honestly believe that's why I call it pride. I think to some extent, when we have that feeling, it's us saying we're taking the place of God. We're kind of stepping into that role, and that's a slippery slope, because that's not our place. And strangely, as you begin to shift back and recognize that these are resources that, yes, I'm called to manage them, I'm called to steward them, I'm called to use them well, but they're ultimately not mine. And it changes your relationship with them, and you begin to see it differently. And you still want to be the provider, you still want to be the security person, you still want to give good things to your family and do all of those things, but the drive for it and the measure of it comes from a different place. It's no longer about looking over and going, how much is in the bank account? It's more, what's the joy, what's the relationship, what's the time we spend together and the energy we spend together and these sorts of things. And yes, money may help facilitate some of that, but at the end of the day, that's not really the measure of it. It's not, it's a tool, it's not the measure of who you are as a man. And that's a really hard thing for us to do, because everything, all of the messaging around us tells us that that's not right. All of the
Yes.
messages you hear say
Yeah.
that that's not right. I mean, even in the church, even if you go to the Christian church, you get messages oftentimes. It's strange to me because I've heard 4 messages in the church. So one was, well, this person has nothing, so they must not be very blessed by God. They must not have good faith. This
Yeah.
person has lots of resources, therefore they're blessed by God.
Yeah.
But at the same time, in the same place, I've heard the message, well, this person has nothing. That's because they're so faithful and holy and spiritual. And
Yeah.
this person has a bunch of stuff. They must be evil and take advantage of people. And
Yeah.
it's like, wait a minute, that means it's not the money or the lack of money. It's the person, it's their attitude, it's their behavior, it's their relationship. That's what's making it right or wrong. It's not the amount of resources they have, it's their relationship with those resources. And it's a weird shift of mind that is easy to say, it's hard to actually live out. I think we have to fight against it every single day, because all of the messages come to us saying, that's not right, that's not right, that's not right, that's not right, 24/7, every news channel, every commercial, everything.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I know on your podcast, it's talking about this as well. Like, what is stewardship? Like, it's this responsibility that we have.
Mhm.
Yet, scriptures are interesting. And quite honestly, we could spend hours just talking about this concept alone, how we misunderstand even scriptures. And then, of course,
Mhm.
if it's taught in the church that, you're blessed because you have more, but then you're blessed if you don't have, we're blessed either way.
You're
We're
blessed
we're
or you're
just
not.
blessed.
Yeah.
Like we're blessed with this responsibility to steward what we have. And I think sometimes just the fact that one just measuring others by what they have in essence is wrong.
Mhm.
But I think there's this subconscious thing as being a man and being in a traditional role as a provider and a husband, that if one is unable to do that by quote unquote his self, that he's somehow a failure.
You
When
failed.
when that is the point. We don't do this on our own. None of us do. This doesn't
No.
come, and if we understand macroeconomics, even just economics, like we do this together. You and I actually share a lot of the same space. We do a lot of the same things, yet we're on podcasts talking about this. Why? Because we're trying to reach other people, period, end of story.
Right.
We're essentially, competitors who are helping each other. Like
And
it
yet
just
literally come on each other's
literally
show.
on each
It's like,
other's show. Like
yeah.
there's no better example than understanding that we just want to help people, period, end of story. And if
Right.
I resonate with people and you resonate, awesome, because we have a mindset of understanding that's abundance, right? So,
Mhm.
Scott, I can't agree with you more on this one, and I really struggle with those who are here because I've been there and I've
Absolutely.
felt that. And at times, when things aren't going fantastic, what happens is we tend to have a little PTSD from
It
times
bubbles back up.
before, and we're like, I've already dealt with this. I've already, so walk us through your framework. I think this is a good setup. Talk
Mhm.
about your framework. What do you suggest in your book, Inspired Stewardship? Talk to us about what it is that you kind of break down as your main points there.
Yeah. So there's actually, like I think a lot of us, I have probably in the book, there's probably 3 or 4 kind of main frameworks that I use, but I'll kind of talk about the overarching one that kind of laces throughout everything else. Because It's kind of like the Russian, what are they called? Majushka dolls, the nesting dolls where
Yeah, the
one's
nesting
inside the
dolls.
other,
Hmm.
inside's the other, they all interconnect. But at a broad framework, what I like people to recognize, and I think it does build up on what we were just talking about, is the beginning of all things is to invest in yourself. And that's not being selfish, because a lot of times people are like, oh no, I can't develop, I can't spend time on myself because that's selfish. It's like, no, 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 that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about until you actually understand yourself, until you know how you're wired, until you know things about how you see the world, until you know what beliefs you have, until you know what your priorities are, what your values are, until you know yourself, it's almost impossible for you to actually authentically serve other people, because you're doing it out of an incompleteness, and you can't really serve others and help them arrive at wholeness if you're not whole yourself. It's that I can't love others till I love myself. It's love your neighbor as yourself. Well, if you hate yourself, you're going to hate your neighbor too. It's that kind of feeling. And so that's honestly the hardest step, because most of us think we understand ourselves, but we don't. By the way, if you don't believe that, just ask someone who knows you really well. If you're married, ask your spouse. Be careful with this one. If you're not married, ask somebody else who's your best friend or somebody who knows you well. Ask them some questions about how you really act in certain situations. And almost always you're going to hear something and go, really? I say that, or I do that? Because we don't really see ourselves authentically. So it's doing that. So I call that the invest in yourself step. And again, there's about a million frameworks and systems and processes under that. As you do that, though, almost immediately, as soon as you begin to unpack this, I do think you need to begin to invest in others. Call that serving others if you want to. But it's the idea of, even if you're 3 steps ahead of somebody else, find somebody who's 3 steps behind and help them come along. Reach your hand down and lift somebody else up. Begin to interact with others. Because what's interesting is, as you begin to do that, you get feedback that tells you, are you on the right track or not with the investing in yourself part. You get things coming back to you that's like, wow, man, when I talk to Travis about this, I get so much energy and joy, and this is so exciting to me. You've met that person that starts talking about something and they're like, oh, I'm so excited, and you're like, great, I want to help. How can I help? By the way, what are we doing? It's their excitement just carries the day. You want to be part of it just because they're so excited about it. So it's engaging with other people and finding those things where it's like, man, this clicks, this is good, this is something I need to spend more energy and more time on. That's, in my opinion, that's God's way of reinforcing in us, hey, you're on the right track, you're heading towards the things you're supposed to be doing, you're being more authentic to who I created you to be, and you're getting that reinforcement. So invest in yourself, then invest in others. Naturally, if you do those 2 things, the third step happens, which is you begin to develop influence. All of a sudden, people begin to look at you. That happened to me. My wife and I were doing things differently. And what happened? People start coming up and going, can you help me? I don't know what you're doing, but I'd like a piece of it. I need to learn from you. I need to understand how you see the world. And because of that, you naturally have influence, because that's really all influence is that ability to interact with others in a way that helps them begin to do something, not because it's good for you, but because it's good for them. Don't get me wrong, it may help you too. There's an exchange in value. People pay me for coaching, but it's also good for them. And my real motivation is because of the them part, not because of the me part. It's the focus is different. That's influence. That's different than manipulation. Manipulation is where I get you to do something because it's only good for me, and I may take advantage of you to do it. That's different. So as we begin to invest in ourselves, invest in others, develop our influence, then the last step happens, or the last piece of the framework happens, which is this idea of impacting the world. And in this case, when I say the world, I don't necessarily mean 1,000 people or 1,000,000 people or global reach or that. I just simply mean, naturally, as you begin to influence others, that has an impact. And most of the time, you don't know where that impact ends, because that person that you influence then goes and touches 3 other people's lives. And then those people touch 3 more. And then those people touch 3 more. And pretty soon you may have influenced indirectly the entire world and didn't even realize it, because it's not, you don't ever get to see necessarily all of the harvest of your fruits that you've planted, all of the seeds that you've planted. You don't get to see them come in. I was a school teacher. One of the girls that I taught later became a doctor. She now does research work. She may cure cancer someday or something. I have a small piece, not by any means the whole thing, but I have a small piece in influencing her on that journey. That's part of my impact, even though I'm not the one that would actually do the research work in that case. So it's that realizing that your impact spreads way beyond what you ever see, lets you keep going and keep continuing and keep on that path. And of course, this isn't a one and done or steps that you're ever done with. It's a process that you repeat over and over. Because guess what? You invest in yourself, you're going to discover a whole new set of limiting beliefs as you get rid of the first layer.
Yeah, that is the truth right there. Um, and it's so important to understand the systems to help you get past those belief systems because more and
Yep.
more as the layers of that keep getting pulled away become apparent. Talk to me. I love this framework. I love the idea. It's such an abundance mindset. It really
Mm-hmm.
is. It's such a freeing concept. And I find that it's interesting to me the people that have scarcity mindsets, they are a lot of times really difficult to get along with, be
Mm-hmm.
around. They're not positive. It's always woe is me. It's always I'm the victim. And it really is this mindset. Would you say that the mindset is the most important part of your framework?
Absolutely.
Or would you say, okay, yeah, so you'd agree.
Yeah.
But talk to me like what is it? How do you help people, or what have you found personally, within obviously your studies and your training and things? What has helped people the most to get past these blocks that they're struggling with?
So there's really kind of two different levers that I see as kind of the biggest levers that we pull. Now, again, within that, there's a million different things, and I'm not going to go down all of those rabbit trails. But one, like you said, is this idea of mindset, belief, structures around how we see the world and think about the world. So that's having a growth mindset, having an abundance mindset. Growth mindset is simply believing that I can be better tomorrow than I am today. That the world can be better tomorrow than it is today. Other people can be better tomorrow than they are today. It's looking at the world as something that can improve. And of course, scarcity versus abundance mindset. An abundance mindset is there's more than enough for everybody, and so we can all win. Where the scarcity mindset is, if I don't get mine, someone else is going to get it, and therefore I can't have it. It's this idea of lack or loss. And a lot of it is sitting down and first off articulating it. Again, this is getting back to recognizing it. So listening to yourself talk, writing things down. I have sometimes have people just start writing down all of the thoughts that pop through their head in a day. By the way, folks, if you ever do that, you will look at them at the end of the day and be like, I would not let anyone talk to somebody I liked this way. How am I talking to myself a way that I would, if somebody talked to my wife that way, I would hit them. I would be upset. It would be a bad day. But here I am talking to myself that way and believing this about myself. And so as you surface those beliefs, there's a lot of different ways that you can begin to change them. But a lot of it comes down to changing, positive affirmations, gratitude exercises, these sorts of small little things, which brings me to the second lever, which is this idea of changing habits and systems as opposed to depending on just quote willpower. There is a degree to which willpower is important. Willpower gets you started, but what keeps you going in the long term is those things that are, you've set up habits and systems and patterns and routines. Use gratitude as an example. Literally every single day I write in a gratitude journal. I have got a gratitude journal that goes back to 2009. I had to stop and think how long, to 2009. I have done that every day since 2009. It is a habit now to think about the world in those terms, because every single day I have to write down 3 things that I'm grateful for that day. And I've even challenged myself from time to time. I'll say, okay, for the next 30 days, I'm not allowed to repeat any. Every day, every 3 has to be unique. So whatever I put yesterday, I can't put tomorrow. And whatever I put tomorrow, I can't put the next day. stop and think about that. For 30 days, 3 things a day, it's 90 things that you're grateful for. By the end of the day, you start getting to the things that actually are the things that you've ignored, but they're truly blessings. The things that you don't even see, you're blind to. And yet when you write them down, you're like, well, yeah, I am thankful for that. Things like a roof over your head and things like that. So it's amazing to me how doing those small actions, but doing them and creating the systems and the processes to make them a habit and a routine makes you get just a little bit better every single day. But if you do that long enough with enough consistency, you make massive changes in what you do, how you think, how you see the world, how you relate with others, and all of those other things that are really what we want. And the trap is we all think that we're going to change it with some sort of sudden event. We're going to go to that event and it's going to completely change my life. Not usually. I'm not going to say that can't happen, but not normally. Most of us, that's not how it works. It's instead in those small moments that our lives are changed.
I love that. So for you, as you're teaching and coaching, experiencing this yourself, you're finding that these habits are really what change. And I have a gratitude journal. I have a journal, period. And I think that's just the point. Like most business owners, they're happy to talk about their business and their life and what they're doing because it can absorb them, right? But to get outside yourself, I love the focus on the other. I learned about this concept, from scripture, right? Love your neighbor, but to consider this really as not just a neighbor next to you, like living next to you, but this idea that everyone's our neighbor. As Christ goes on, he preaches the sermon like, no, even what you think is an enemy who's impure and not like they are your neighbor, the Samaritan that you don't like, and they probably don't like you. So it was an interesting way of teaching this parable to everyone because now everybody's like, wow, we're all responsible for literally all mankind to be responsible for how we treat them. Not just literally the person living next to you, but when I understood how to treat the other, meaning the other people in life, as God would, that began to change my mind. It began to change my ideas, and I pray every day, and I'm sure others who are out there are faith-based people, they pray. And just, have you ever had a chance to just pray in gratitude? I had a mentor who, he said, every Thanksgiving, he just for a week doesn't pray for anything he desires. He just prays gratitude prayers. I'm like, wow, I don't know if I can do that, right? But I think it's all these little things. You have such a great attitude. You have such a great abundance mindset. You have such a great way of disseminating this knowledge, Scott. It's part of you. It's become you. Now, maybe 20 years ago that might not have been all truth, right? There may have been some things that you learned over time, but having these habits, I can tell, like, are a huge part of what you do. If people are struggling, especially male business owners out there who are maybe in those funks where you and I both have been, and they're listening to this now, what's one thing or two things that you could say, try this now, do something, is it as simple as buying the journal? Is it as simple as just setting aside some time? What is it that you would suggest they start doing, and maybe elaborate on a couple of two or three things that would be helpful for them as they improve?
So one thing I'm going to do is I'll lean into what you just said about creating some time. I think especially business owners, we're always running from fire to fire, emergency to emergency, thing to thing, do, action, 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 result, 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 result. And not creating some time in your day to just be, to think. In the corporate world, I used to call that the white space, creating white space so that you could stop and you can think, you can process, you can plan, you can reflect, you can do all of those things. And most people don't have a day or a time set aside on their calendar to do planning, to do reflection. And in fact, I've had business owners say, oh, well, doing that's a waste. I can't do that. That's wasting time. It's like, no, absolutely. That's the most valuable time in your day. And if you create it and force that to happen and make that happen, it's going to start changing everything else. Everything else becomes more effective, more efficient, more productive. You know, you're getting more done, you're doing it better because you've stopped and thought. You've stopped and processed. You stop. And honestly, as a business owner, that's your job much more than it is the doing. Now I'm a solopreneur. I kind of wear all of the hats. I still have to do it. I still have to create time where in that period of time, no, I'm the CEO right now. I'm putting on my CEO hat and I'm thinking about vision and process, and I'm thinking about the big picture and all of those things. I have to do that on a personal level. I have to do that on a professional level. You have to create those times to be reflective, to plan, to do those strategic things and get out of the tactical. And if you don't do that, if you haven't created that, you're never going to grow as much as you could. Your business isn't going to grow. You're not going to grow as a person. All of those things, it's going to stifle growth in your relationships, in your finances, in your business, everything, because you're not growing, neither is anything else. And the growth happens in those quiet times as much or more than it happens in the times of crisis. Your character is exposed in a time of crisis. Your character's developed in the other times, and I think we forget that. The other one, I'll give folks an actionable tip that I've used, and it's simply changing a word or changing your language a little bit. And I'm a big believer in changing our language changes how we see the world, because how we label things, creates the reality. Do I see that person who believes different than me as an other, or do I see them as a child of God who's just different than me? It's different is good, or different is just different. Different is bad, or different is just different. It's that understanding. So here's the language. The language is around time, and I know you work a lot with business owners in time. So I've heard a lot of business owners who will say to their compadres, their friends, their other business owners, and those sorts of things, they'll say something like, I don't have time to do that. I don't have time to go to date night with my wife. I don't have time to put some planning time on my calendar. I don't have time to make it to my daughter's soccer game. I don't have time to finish that project. Here's the interesting thing. I literally say, you're no longer allowed to say, I don't have time. Change it to, that's not a priority for me. Just change your language. Just say out loud, that's not a priority for me. Because weirdly, if you say to a coworker, I don't have time to make it to my daughter's soccer game, they'll go, oh, that stinks. That's so sad. I really wish you had time to make it to your daughter's soccer game. Poor you. You're so busy. You don't have time to make it to your daughter. But if you say out loud to your friend, it's not a priority for me to make it to my daughter's soccer game, they're going to look at you and be like, you jerk.
Right?
I mean, how horrible. What a horrible dad you are. You need to go to your dude, take off, go to your daughter's soccer game. And they're going to see it a different way. And by the way, so are you. All of a sudden, you're going to look at it and go, really? That's not a priority for me. But by the way, when you say, I don't have time for that, that's actually all you're saying is that's not a priority for me. You haven't created the routine and the structure and the boundaries and all of those things that are necessary to allow you to do that, because you've allowed other things to become a priority over that thing. And if you can say that out loud, by the way, if you say out loud, that's not a priority for me, and you go, yeah, that's not a priority for me, that's actually probably something that you need to get rid of in some way. It needs to be delegated or eliminated or something. It's probably not something that needs to be on your plate anyway. So you're also identifying those things that are prime for getting rid of in some way, shape, or form. And I know you talk a lot about all the different ways we can get rid of things, but of course, the first thing is to even be aware that they exist.
Yeah, I think you've dropped some nuggets here that I couldn't agree more with. The fact that words have power.
Absolutely.
Why are books still the number one form of influence? It's because they contain words that have value and power. Yet those who are really flippant with their language, casual with their language, they're not going to allow themselves to think higher thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was it may have been Alfred Bandura. I'll need to double, triple check on this, but there was a human developmental psychologist that said a thought is not complete until it is spoken.
Mm.
And, but the other is true. You can speak into existence thoughts. You can train yourself and retrain the brain. I
Hmm.
love that example of, well, it's not a priority. And, well, it is a priority, just is not higher than my work right now, right? Or what?
Hmm.
And that's exactly the message that you're conveying to other people. But you're right. I think sometimes also a scarcity mentality of like, well, there's not enough, right?
Hmm.
There's always enough. In fact, the thing that we all have equal is our time. 24 hours in a day, 7 days a week, no matter how you dice and slice it, we all have that same amount of time. Now, how much quantity of that time we have on this earth is going to be
Nobody
different.
knows.
Nobody knows, and how we get to spend it is up to some limits of where we're at. But the reality is that that time is all the same. So
Hmm.
I love this example, and I love you sharing what you've learned and how we can begin to change our lives by changing our thought process, our mindsets to be more abundantly focused. I'll let you get the last word on this one, Scott. Tell us, as you're the inspired stewardship guy, tell us what your definition of stewardship is and how that really has changed you and how that changes your clients.
So stewardship to me is, the simplest definition is it's the idea of management instead of ownership. It's the idea that all of the things that I have that touch, my hands, my eye passes over, I interact with in any way, shape, or form. So this isn't just about money. It's not just about time. It's not even just about your own talent and being. It's literally that person that you see when you're walking into the mall. It's the person that served you coffee this morning at Starbucks as you whizzed through at 900 miles an hour. All of those things touch your life, and you have a responsibility to manage those things well. And well to me means to try to leave. It's kind of the Boy Scout thing, leave it a little better than it was when you got there. That's in the Boy Scouts, they tell you that about campsites. If you get to the campsite and there's a pile of wood and you start a fire, now go cut wood and leave a bigger pile of wood there when you leave than was there when you got there. If it was clean it better. If the path was missing some rocks, put the rocks back on the path. It's the idea of I'm here, so I have a responsibility to just make it a little bit better than it was when I got here. So when that person hands you coffee and you actually look at them and you've looked at their name tag and you say, thank you, Susan, or thank you, Thomas, or I appreciate you, and you really mean it. This isn't about fake it till you make it. This isn't about not being authentic. It's literally looking into that person's eyes and saying, you're a human being. I have the responsibility to try to help you have a little better today than you did 5 minutes ago. I have the responsibility to make your life a little better than it was 5 minutes ago. And that, again, that extends to the relationships we have in our family. It extends to our business. It extends to our finances. It extends to every component of our life. And I think often we make stewardship too small. We start thinking about it just in terms of time and money and those things. And I even use it, time, talent, and treasures. But it's the talent piece, I think, that is so important, and we ignore it, because that talent there even just means the way we interact, the way we view the world, the touches that we do. And that's really where I think we have the multiplying effect of, if you make that barista's day just a little bit better, and then all of a sudden they make the person behind you's day a little bit better, and that makes the person behind you's day, it ripples out in ways that we don't even get to see. And yet that's the kind of influence that we all have, and we sell ourselves short. We convince ourselves that I'm not that important. I don't have that big of an influence or impact, and yet you do.
Yeah, I mean, underestimating that to the nth degree, because that's the ripple effect.
Mm-hmm.
What is the butterfly effect, right? The wing, little tiny insect is creating something that could be a hurricane on the other side of the world, type of idea. Wonderfully said, Scott. I really appreciate your work. And again, I think it's our ability to showcase here that we have abundance mindset. We're giving back and we're literally helping others see the good in what we each offer. I really do appreciate you being here as a guest on the Balanced Growth Show. And I appreciate your time and your talents. Speaking of talents, your book, Inspired Stewardship, tell us where can we get that? Where can others get their hands on that work?
So Inspired Living, you can actually find it anywhere that books are sold as well. I actually put together a page just for your listeners that has the information of the book there, as well as some tools and free resources and all sorts of things. So they can actually find that if they go to inspiredstewardship.com/balance. And that's got where you can purchase the book is there, all of those things. My podcast. So if you want to listen to when Travis appears on my show, that's there as well. All of that is over at inspiredstewardship.com. I'll speak English in a minute, I promise, /balance.
Yeah, English is a funny language. So, and like I said, with the power of words, the problem is we've got to learn how to use them
Then
first
we
and
actually have to
pronounce them.
speak them.
We have to speak it. And it's still my second language. Anyway, well, I've appreciated this conversation, and thank you, Scott, for being here. Others, if you're listening and you've enjoyed this conversation, let us know. Jump over and check Scott's work out with Inspired Living. Also, go to maketimeinstitute.com for copies of our book, or subscribe to the podcast and get both Achieving Balance and Marry and Grow Rich as the audio versions on previous episodes. And until next time, remember, live life on purpose together.